Brought to you by War Thunder. Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Nate here. And it's hot off the presses, following one of the most surprising and sudden releases in gaming history, The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion is back, and has been fully remade from the ground up in the Unreal and modern creation engines. The original Elder Scrolls IV released nearly 20 years ago in 2006, and judging from my comments, the discussions online, and just old Oblivion sales records, it seems safe to say that this will be millions of players' first true experience with the game. And given the lack of marketing material or trailers up to this point, I think a lot of people would benefit from a sort of introduction to this game's lore and story. You know, set the stage for this game's narrative and how it relates to the Elder Scrolls' history. That way, those of you jumping in for the first time, or after a very long hiatus, can get a good feel for this game's plot, what it's about, what you're doing, and how it all ties together in the broader cosmology. Note, this video is very much going to be a history lesson. We're going to explore the history and significance of key concepts, like Akatosh's covenant with the Dragonborn Emperors, what the Amulet of Kings is, who Mankar Cameron is, that sort of thing. That way, when you boot up the game for the first time, you'll know exactly what's going on and why it matters. Anyway, sit back, throw a log on the fire, pour yourself a glass of your finest Cyrodiilic brandy, and relax, as we set the stage for the events of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. But first, a quick word from today's video sponsor. War Thunder is the ultimate vehicular combat experience, available for free now on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. Step into the cockpit or take the wheel of over 2,500 vehicles, including tanks, planes, helicopters, and warships from 10 major nations. From 1920s biplanes and armored cars to cutting-edge jets and modern battle tanks, War Thunder spans nearly a century of military innovation. Feel the adrenaline of intense battles brought to life with ultra-realistic visuals, meticulously crafted vehicles, and immersive sound design that puts you right in the heart of the action. Join a global community of over 70 million players in thrilling PvP combat. Whether you're a history buff or just love high-octane warfare, War Thunder offers an unrivaled experience packed with rich, authentic content. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile devices now, using my links in the description or pinned comment. New players, and those who haven't played in 6 months or more, will receive a massive bonus pack on PC or consoles that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account access. Available for a limited time only, so don't miss it. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Alright, so Oblivion is set in the year 433 of the Third Era, about 201 years prior to the events of Skyrim, and only 6 years after Morrowind. At this point in history, the Septim Empire, or the Empire of Tamriel, as it is known, occupies the entire continent, as well as the Somerset Isles, and several islands and archipelagos in the surrounding waters. However, despite its geographical dominance, the Empire is beginning to show signs of serious strain, perhaps overextension, and something is about to happen to its royal family that'll prove to be particularly catastrophic. Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Ambition, Change, and Destruction, is about to blow this whole house of cards down. You see, while the Septim Empire is about 433 years old at this moment in history, its entire existence and its divine mandate, so to speak, is said to rest on a much, much more ancient covenant made between man and the dragon god Akatosh thousands of years ago in the First Era. Legend has it that in the primordial past, in the earliest days after the creation of Tamriel, the continent was first discovered and then ruled by various species of elves, or Mer. Snow elves, the Falmer, occupied Skyrim. Deep elves and the Chimer, a precursor race to the Dark Elves, controlled Morrowind, and Cyrodiil, now the heartland of the Empire, was ruled by an oppressive race of Daedra-worshipping Mer, known as the Aelids, sometimes called Wild Elves. This early period of elven dominion is known to history as the Malefic era, and it would last for more than 2,500 years. How and when exactly mankind entered the picture is a matter of continuing debate. The official position that would be maintained by the later Septim Empire's historians is that the first humans who arrived on Tamriel came from a now lost, frozen northern continent, then known as Atmora, who migrated in waves very early in the Malefic era. And while there's likely some truth to this theory, there's good reason to suspect that the real story is much more complicated than that. However it happened, the elves of Tamriel began encountering comparatively primitive, tribal groups of humans all around the northeastern section of the continent. Relations were mixed, but in Cyrodiil, where the Daedra devout Aelids ruled, a particularly cruel regime developed. The elves of the Heartland subjected man to unspeakable terrors. The luckiest of humans were enslaved and subjected to back-breaking labor for the rest of their short lives, forced to build elven temples to dark gods. The less lucky ones were routinely sacrificed outright to the Daedra, as the Aelids cultivated what may have been one of the darkest cultures the Mundus had ever seen. Early in the First Era, however, this social order would be inverted. A human slave girl, now known to history as Saint Alicia, was granted a series of visions by the dragon god Akatosh following years of prayer for salvation. She would cultivate a network of followers, and soon enough lead the oppressed people of Cyrodiil into open rebellion against their elven hegemons. Exactly why Akatosh chose this moment to intervene is subject to some controversy. However, as we'll explore momentarily, it's worth noting that Alicia was likely one of the earliest recorded Dragonborns, a mortal blessed with the soul and blood of a Dova. Whether she inherited this condition from her parents, which we know to be possible, or was specifically singled out later in her life by Akatosh, is unknown. Either way, the dragon god bestowed more than just his blood upon the girl, as he, and eventually other divines, aided the armies of men with heroes, artifacts, and their blessings, which slowly, and then rapidly, allowed them to overturn elven rule over Cyrodiil, smashing Aeliad armies, and eventually burning Aeliad cities, before ultimately nearly driving the entire culture into extinction. It's worth noting that Imperial historians by the Third Era like to frame this struggle as a conflict between man and evil, unambiguous Daedra-worshipping elves, but there's some evidence that it was a lot more nuanced than that. The book Daedra Worship, the Aelids, suggests that there were many Aeliad princes and kingdoms that were not Daedra-worshipping, and who actually chose to ally with Alicia's rebellion. Quote, "The Elysian slave revolt of the early First Era was largely fueled by desperate rage against the Aelids' Daedra-inspired cruelty. The Aeliad kings who aligned themselves with the rebellion were largely Aedra worshippers, which in part explains why, once the Aelids were overthrown, Queen Alicia incorporated the leading elven Aedra into the First Empire's worship of the 8 divines." Unquote. So it seems Aeliad culture was not entirely exterminated following this revolt, and that there was political nuance here that has since been lost, but I digress. The success of this rebellion would culminate in the establishment of the Elysian Empire, sometimes referred to as the First Empire of Cyrodiil, one of the first earliest known politically independent human states. Now, a key instrument in the Aelids' ability to oppress and torment mankind had always been in their relationship with the Daedra. It's said that Daedric legions often filled the ranks of Aeliad armies, and the blessings of these dark princes were instrumental in the culture's early prosperity. Many Aeliad princes are even believed to have served the Daedric god of destruction, Mehrunes Dagon, who will become so central to our story soon. Recognizing this, Akatosh made a final covenant with Alesia on her deathbed. So long as a dragonborn, one with his blood, sits on the ruby throne and rules Cyrodiil, the dragon god of time would hold back the gates of Oblivion and prevent any further Daedric armies from breaking into Tamriel like the ones the Aelids used to torment mankind. To symbolize this agreement, he bestowed Alesia with an amulet, forged from his own blood, which could be used to light the dragon fires, an eternal symbol of their new covenant. Quote, Akatosh drew from his breast a burning handful of his heart's blood, and he gave it into Alesia's hand, saying, This shall also be a token to you of our joined blood and pledged faith. So long as you and your descendants shall wear the Amulet of Kings, then shall this dragonfire burn, an eternal flame, as a sign to all men and gods of our faithfulness. So long as the dragonfires shall burn, to you and to all generations, I swear that my heart's blood shall hold fast the gates of Oblivion. Unquote. Following the death of Alesia, the empire she created would persist for another 2 millennia. Throughout this period, its borders ebbed and flowed, as did its prosperity, but so long as its ruler wielded the Amulet of Kings and the dragonfires remained burning, its covenant with Akatosh persisted. However, by the 2330s of the First Era, plague and internal conflicts, driven by a series of religious disputes and the ambitions of various petty nobles, had shattered the empire, and the Amulet of Kings would be lost for a few centuries. During this time, it's believed that Molag Bal, Daedric Prince of Domination, attempted to take advantage of the weakened barrier between his realm and the Mundus, according to a few literary references. However, much of the history following the immediate collapse of the Elysian Empire has been lost. The Amulet of Kings would eventually resurface, and history would pick up again roughly 4 centuries later in the 2700s of the First Era, when it somehow ends up in the possession of a figure known as Reman of Cyrodiil, or just Reman Cyrodiil for short. The official story, parroted by modern imperial historians, is that out of the ashes of a shattered Elysian empire and the bickering successor states that emerged in its wake, a young baby boy was found by a shepherd in Cyrodiil, already wrapped in the Amulet of Kings. The shepherd, supposedly, just carried the young boy to the White Gold Tower and sat him upon the empty throne. Legend has it, by the age of 12, the young Reman was leading armies, and by his early 20s, he had formed a coalition that controlled much of Cyrodiil proper. I should note, and it's probably a bit obvious, that this story is very likely embellished. Many authors who we can read in Oblivion and Skyrim outright reject it as imperial propaganda, and will likely never know the truth behind how this Reman of Cyrodiil figure really came to power and acquired the amulet. The official version of events largely comes from this text called the Remanada, which describes itself as a fragmented, mythical recounting of the conception of Reman and the return of the Chim El Adabal with the people of Tamriel, the covenant with Akatosh. The text writes, quote, It was the shepherdess, said Yana, who dared climb the hill when she first heard his cry, and at its peak she saw what it yielded, an infant she named Reman, which is Light of Man, and in the child's forehead was the Chim El Adabal, the Amulet of Kings, alive with the dragon fires of yore and divine promise, and none dared obstruct, said Yana, when she climbed the steps of the White Gold Tower to place the babe Reman on his throne. There he spoke as an adult, saying, I am Cyrodiil come, unquote. This text is describing, a shepherd finding a baby wrapped in the Amulet of Kings, carrying him up the White Gold Tower, And then the baby speaks as a man saying, I am Cyrodiil. Like, this is probably not 100% accurate, and Bethesda knows this. This text was also probably written by Michael Kirkbride. Whatever the case, something that is more certain and very relevant to the narrative of the Elder Scrolls IV is that after Riemann assumed the throne and began unifying Cyrodiil during his adolescence, Tamriel was subjected to a sudden invasion by a mysterious, perhaps snake-like people hailing from an even more mysterious, obscure land known as Akavir. Akavir, pay attention to that name, Akavir, Akatosh, something might be going on there, is believed to be a continent somewhere west of Tamriel, said to be home to a population of various alien-like races, among which are these people called the Sayesi. We've never actually seen an official representation of the Sayesi, or any of the Akaviri peoples for that matter, but their scaled armors and iconic katanas have appeared in the games, giving us a vague idea of their culture. Despite being described as snake-like, they seem to at least have been bipedal, and very much seem to have been culturally inspired from historic Asian cultures. Anyway, the Sayesi had supposedly been engaging in minor raids of Tamrielic islands and shipping lanes for ages, since the Elysian Empire's waning days. But now, in the 2700s of the First Era, they suddenly landed an enormous invasion force in northern Skyrim, and began cutting through Nordic armies, making a beeline towards Cyrodiil. Riemann was able to rally his coalition and form an army to meet the invaders as they were passing through the Geril Mountains on the border with Skyrim, at a site known as the Pale Pass. The two sides met for what was expected to be an epic and bloody confrontation. But most accounts agree that the fighting had barely started when suddenly, perhaps after Riemann dragon shouted, the Sayesi army just surrendered en masse, claiming that it had done what it had come to Tamriel to do. The Sayesi had found a dragonborn, and they hailed Riemann as their emperor on the spot. The book Legacy of the Dragon Guard reads, quote, "As all school children know, northern Tamriel was invaded by a legion of Akaviri raiders in 2700 of the First Era. Mighty warriors with potent powers, these Akaviri cut a swath through Skyrim, defeating all opponents, until they were met at Pale Pass by a Cyrodiilic army under the command of General Riemann. After a brief battle, the Akaviri surrendered en masse to Riemann, saying that in him they had found what they had come to Tamriel to seek." Unquote. Why the Sayesi came to Tamriel in search of a Dragonborn is a mystery up for debate. But what isn't is that with their army now firmly under Riemann's command, his combined force, which already included the Cyrodiilic troops, had become the uncontested, most powerful force in Tamriel. And through a combination of conquest and shrewd political maneuvering, Skyrim and High Rock soon found themselves essentially subordinate to Riemann's designs. Riemann was able to then consolidate his power amongst the Cyrodiilic states, and a second empire was established, with the Amulet of Kings as its sigil and the Dragonfires relit once more. The best and brightest of the Sayesi troops who joined Riemann would be organized into an elite unit, known as the Dragon Guard, personally loyal to the Emperor, and it's this organization from which the Blades, who we encounter in Oblivion and Skyrim, descend from. The Dragonborn Emperor would later conquer Valenwood, bringing a violent end to the ancient Cameron dynasty, as well as even the Somerset Isles, before dying in 2762 of the First Era. Riemann's successors would continue to rule the empire he founded for another 2 centuries, some more competently than others. Something worth noting is that the Riemann emperors employed these Akaviri potentates to aid them in their rule. Essentially, they would pick a well-disposed Sayesi to serve as their prime minister or grand vizier to help them rule alongside them. In 2920, Riemann III, the reigning emperor, was assassinated under very mysterious circumstances, leaving behind no surviving direct descendants, and thus the Elder Council hailed his potentate, an Akaviri named Verzidu Shea, as the new ruler. While recognizing himself as head honcho, Shea refused the title of emperor and continued calling himself potentate. His first act was to dedicate a new era, and thus 2920 was the last year of the first era, and the second began with the rise of an Akaviri-controlled Cyrodiil. This Akaviri-run empire is technically a direct continuation of Riemann's empire, but it's normally referred to as the potentate by historians to designate its distinction. Verzidu Shea would continue to lead for another 324 years. Mind you, it seems as though the Sayesi have much longer lifespans than normal men, but he would oversee an empire in shambles. While Riemann III left no direct heirs, various cousins and distant relatives with claims to the throne rose up against the new government, and the distracted empire suffered defeats on various fronts. Amidst this chaos, a splinter group of the Dragon Guard, who again were loyal to the Dragonborn emperors, and by this time seems to have also begun recruiting humans, broke off to search for a new Dragonborn. They began calling themselves the Blades, and this faction would become particularly prominent in later games. As things were unraveling, the status of the Amulet of Kings at this point isn't especially clear. It seems as though Verzidu Shea, the Akaviri potentate, kept it around in his possession, but didn't wear it. In fact, he shouldn't have been able to wear it. He wasn't a Dragonborn. The lore is you can't don the Amulet of Kings unless you have the dragon blood, and the fires likely dimmed. Verzidu would be assassinated himself by the Morag Tong in 324 of the Second Era, and his son would succeed him, ruling for another century before he himself was assassinated in 430, and no successor would be nominated, marking the official end of Riemann's empire, and beginning a period known as the Interregnum, or Between the Kingdoms, an age of chaos which would persist until Tiber Septim's foundation of the Third Empire in the Third Era. The Interregnum would last for about 400 years. It's characterized by various makeshift factions and racial alliances attempting to fill the power vacuum left in the wake of Riemann's kingdom. Within the walls of Cyrodiil itself, a rump state, claiming to be the direct heir of the Second Empire, limped along but failed to find much support beyond Cyrodiil itself, and was marred by political instability. The Daedra also began taking advantage of the extinguished dragonfires. It's during this tumultuous period that the events of the Elder Scrolls Online take place, and believe it or not, the Amulet of Kings plays a central role. It's a little hard to explain in such a short video like this, and kinda beyond our purview. There's also the fact that player choice can actually influence what happens with the amulet, but essentially in the 570s, 140 years after the fall of the last Akaviri potentate, a Cyrodiilic nobleman named Verin Aquilarius managed to capture the imperial city and recover the Amulet of Kings. But, since he was not a Dragonborn, his claim was weak, and he could not reignite the Dragonfires or even wear the amulet himself. He did something kinda crazy. He attempted to use the amulet in a ritual where he asked Akatosh to make him into a Dovahkiin, which it's not obvious if that would have worked anyway, and has some very interesting lore implications. You know, again, maybe not all Dragonborns even have to be born that way, but whatever the case, during this ritual, Verin was actually tricked by his magical advisor, a high elf named Manamarco, who was secretly collaborating with Molag Bal into just straight up breaking whatever was left of Akatosh's barriers, and opening up the doors for a massive Daedric incursion into Tamriel. Molag Bal's actual strategy was to use these giant anchors in an attempt to drag Nirn into Cold Harbor, his realm of Oblivion, and ESO is all about reversing and preventing this catastrophe. During the game, the player, known as the Vestige, and their companions recover the Amulet of Kings, which was hidden away in Cyrodiil's tomb after Varen's blunder, and you use its power to temporarily become a champion of Akatosh, in one final battle where Molag Bal's invasion is routed for good. After which, the Rump Imperial Elder Council, which was still ruffling around Cyrodiil years after the fall of Reman's empire, took the amulet, and that was that. More on the amulet in a moment. Tamriel would remain politically fractured and chaotic for the next 250 years. Daedra may have continued to exploit the now weakened barriers between the Mundus and Oblivion, with Akatosh's covenant no longer in force, but nothing quite on the scale of what Molag Bal pulled would happen anytime soon. At this time, the exact history and political economy of Cyrodiil and Skyrim, and High Rock for that matter, aren't well understood. Within the Heartland, it seems various urban centers like Skingrad, Coral, and Anvil were functionally independent. We don't even know who was holding the Imperial City itself. The Elder Council appears to have gone entirely defunct following the events of ESO. Skyrim's fate in the quarter millennium after Elder Scrolls Online is just a complete mystery. By the first half of the 800s, around 250 years after ESO, history starts to pick up again. The official story is that in around 828 of the Second Era, the man who would come to be known as Tiber Septim was born on that frozen, lost continent of Atmora to the north. He would be one of the last Atmorans to migrate south and arrive in Skyrim. Soon after he showed up, the little communication that continued to exist between Tamriel and Atmora permanently ceased. The future Tiber Septim received an education in the Way of the Voice, and learned the arts of war from various Nord chieftains. He eventually found himself serving a petty king in Falkreath, known as Cuchulainn, as general, and after one particularly eventful skirmish with some Reachmen near the site of Old Hroldan, where he used his voice to score a decisive victory, he was summoned by the Greybeards to High Hrothgar, where he was first recognized as Dovahkiin, and, if the legend is true, promised to one day rule all of Tamriel, before returning to Falkreath to serve his king. From here, Tiber quickly began a conquest of Cyrodiil in the name of Cuchulainn. Supposedly, after fighting a great battle in the Geralt Mountains near the tomb of that great Reman Cyrodiil, he found the Amulet of Kings again, which he presented to his master. And while fighting in the Imperial Heartland, many of the Blades, that ancient, originally Akaviri order of knights, descendant of Reman's first Dragon Guard, who had been hiding, searching for a new Dragonborn Emperor since the Interregnum, tracked Tiber Septim down, and swore fealty to the young man, who by now was probably getting some pretty treasonous ideas. By 854 of the Second Era, the city of Cyrodiil itself and the White Gold Tower had fallen to Tiber's armies. Plans were arranged to hail Cuchulainn as the emperor of a newly refounded empire. But before he could be crowned, the old petty king was mysteriously assassinated, and with the support of the armies, the Blades, and seemingly Akatosh, Tiber Septim was hailed instead as the first emperor of the Third Cyrodiilic Empire, and the Dragonfires were reignited. Septim would spend the next 4 decades bringing all of Tamriel under his banner, through a combination of politicking and conquest, often rooted in his divine legitimation by Akatosh. This 40-some-year-long period is known to history as the Tiber Wars, and it's one of the most eventful and fascinating in Tamrielic lore. But, again, beyond the purview of this video. For the first time in recorded history, all of Tamriel would be united. Some regions more willingly than others, and thus, shortly after the fall of the Somerset Isles, the last pocket of resistance to his new empire, Tiber Septim declared an end to the Second Era in the year 896, ushering in the Third Era. The era in which Oblivion is set. For the next 4 centuries, the Empire's boundaries would remain largely unchanged, with the occasional exception of a rebellion or civil war that was always snuffed out. Now, according to some sources, amidst Tiber Septim's wars of unification, A Bosmer, or perhaps Altmer, more on that later, mage by the name of Mankar Cameron was given access to the Mysterium Xarxes, a tome written by the Daedric Prince of Destruction and Change, Mehrunes Dagon, said to be of great evil and power, requiring special magical protections and license to merely handle the text. Legend has it that Mankar spent years analyzing the book, and eventually went on to author a series of commentaries on it, which we can later read in Oblivion, revealing his own analysis and a unique worldview shaped by his experience with the text. Cameron came to believe in a subversion of the typical creation myth. You see, most cultures across Tamriel believe that the Mundus, the realm of existence in which Nirn and Tamriel exist, was created by the god Lorkhan, or Shor, as the Nords call him, or Shezar, as the Imperials do, who either tricked or convinced many of the universe's primordial gods to lend their power to the construction of a new plane of reality. These gods are often called the Aedra, meaning our ancestors by mortals, whereas gods that did not participate in this creation are referred to as Daedra, meaning not our ancestors. However, it eventually became apparent to the Aedra that they would be required to sacrifice a great deal of their power for this creation, and that they would be bound to it afterwards. Discovering this, many fled in horror, though some chose to remain and see the project through to the end, becoming the variations of the Divines still worshipped today. For his trickery, Lorkhan would be sundered by the remaining Aedra, who ripped his heart from his body and cast it far into the distance, eventually landing where Mount Vardenfell would emerge soon after. This is the typical creation myth, variants of which are believed across Tamriel. Mankar Cameron came to believe an inversion of this tale, that Lorkhan did not trick the Aedra into creating the Mundus, but that he was actually betrayed and usurped by them. His experience with the Mysterium Xarxes convinced him that the Mundus was really Lorkhan's own Daedric realm, and it was stolen by the imposter Aedra. He thus determined that the barriers between Oblivion and Tamriel must be severed, that the dragon fires should be extinguished, and that the Daedra, specifically his patron Mehrunes Dagon, Prince of Revolution, Destruction, and Change, should come and liberate Nirn from its false gods. Cameron spent years preaching about his new heretical religious philosophy openly, but found little support amongst the masses, and he was confronted by hostile authorities. Thus, he moved his operation underground, founding the Mythic Dawn, a secret organization dedicated to ultimately extinguishing the dragon fires and realizing his and Mehrunes Dagon's vision. Now, there is some debate around when exactly Mankar Cameron was born and began preaching his new inverted message. In Oblivion's gameplay, we meet a character named Tarmina. She's a master wizard at Cyrodiil's Mages Guild, and the keeper of the Mystic Archives at the Arcane University. She is widely regarded as one of the foremost experts on Daedra and their cults in her time. She tells us that Mankar Cameron received the Mysterium Xarxes at the same time Tiber Septim was conquering Tamriel, and that he founded the Mythic Dawn very shortly after. However, other sources suggest that Mankar wasn't even born until centuries after Tiber's conquests. The book, The Refugees, places his birth in the year 267 of Tiber Septim's Third Era. This is obviously quite confusing, and it seems the writers have maintained this ambiguity on purpose. Cameron's partnership with Mehrunes Dagon certainly could have led to his life being extended centuries beyond that of a typical Mer, who already live centuries longer than mortal men, but suffice it to say, when exactly the Mythic Dawn was founded, and when this elf came to become Mehrunes Dagon's champion, is unknown. In the meantime, Tiber Septim died in the year 38 of the era he proclaimed. As mentioned, the next few hundred years of imperial rule brought little change to the empire's boundaries, though its relationship with its territories varied in time and place. Some areas were under direct rule, Others merely paid lip service to the Emperor. But the long story short is that this status quo was preserved as the throne and the Amulet of Kings passed through a series of dragonborn emperors, and the dragonfires remained burning up until the year 433 of the Third Era, when the events of Oblivion are finally set. The reigning emperor is Uriel Septim VII. He is the 21st emperor of the Third Cyrodiilic Empire and has held the throne for the past 65 years. He is widely regarded as a wise, well-tempered ruler capable of steering his people through turbulent times. But his own time is running out. Cameron's Mythic Dawn has been rapidly growing in strength, gathering their forces in a number of cave systems across Cyrodiil, and they plan to assassinate the Emperor, all of his living children, and steal the Amulet of Kings in an effort to break Akatosh's covenant with man and facilitate an invasion of Tamriel by Mehrunes Dagon, who will restore the world to its rightful Daedric leadership, with Cameron and the Mythic Dawn supporting them. Through the Mysterium Xarxes and the help of Dagon, Mankar has forged his own plane of oblivion, Gaer Alata, or Paradise, as he calls it, where the souls of valiant Mythic Dawn members who die in service to the cult are promised to spend eternity. Although, what Cameron doesn't tell his followers is that it's only a paradise for him. Thus, the stage is set for the Oblivion Crisis, an event that will bring the Septim Empire to its knees and reshape the trajectory of Tamriel. And on the 27th of Last Seed, in the year 3E433, what will turn out to be the last year of the Third Era, Mankar Cameron and Mehrunes Dagon put their plan into motion. Early in the morning, following a series of prophetic dreams that greatly bothered the Emperor and convinced him of his doom, Uriel's 3 legitimate sons were assassinated by the Mythic Dawn. Recognizing that something was wrong, Uriel's Blade's bodyguards attempted to escort him out of the Imperial City through a network of sewage and drainage tunnels beneath the palace, connected to the dungeon. And along the way, on a nameless prisoner in a cell, Uriel spotted a face that he recognized from his dreams. And thus, the events of the Elder Scrolls IV begin. And there you have it. The groundwork for Bethesda's 2006 Symphony to Cyrodiil has been laid. And if you are just looking to get an introduction to the game, I think this video has served its purpose. However, for the sake of tying up loose ends, I'd also like to explain what Oblivion's narrative, and specifically its conclusion, mean for the future of Tamriel, and how it ultimately relates to Skyrim, and hopefully one day, future Elder Scrolls titles. Obviously, there will be some spoilers here, so if you're concerned about having this game from 2006's ending spoiled, timecodes are on screen now for you to skip ahead. Here we go. During Oblivion's introduction, as we flee the sewers with Uriel Septim VII and his escorts, the Emperor, again inspired by a previous appearance in his dreams, pulls us aside and reveals that he expects to die in these caverns. Understanding what this may mean for the Dragonfires and Akatosh's covenant, he gives the player the Amulet of Kings and informs us that he has one surviving son left, an illegitimate bastard named Martin, who knows nothing of his father but carries the dragon blood. He implores the player to find Martin, get him the Amulet of Kings, and seal the marble jaws of Oblivion. And that's essentially what happens. We find Martin, but lose the Amulet of Kings on the way, and have to go through a series of quests investigating and eventually tracking down the Mythic Dawn, journeying to Mankar Cameron's Gaer Alata to face off against Dagon's champion, where we slay him and recover the jewel. After which, plans are arranged to escort Martin Septim into the Imperial City, crown him as Emperor, and reignite the Dragonfires. Recognizing that this is their last chance, what's left of the Mythic Dawn and Mehrunes Dagon throw everything they have at Cyrodiil for one final climactic battle, and it becomes apparent that simply relighting the Dragonfires and sealing the Oblivion Gates won't be enough. Too many Daedra have already overrun the Mundus. Thus, Martin Septim does something crazy. Rather than try to light the fires, he breaks the Amulet of Kings and combines his own blood with that of Akatosh, transforming into a golden dragon, an avatar of the god of time, and he faces off against Dagon, ultimately defeating and banishing the Daedric prince, as well as his armies, back to Oblivion. This transformation costs the last septim in the bloodline his life, and following it, Martin's avatar of Akatosh is calcified atop the altar of the Temple of the One in Cyrodiil, where the dragon fires once burned. The stone dragon, the calcified flesh of Martin in place of the fires, symbolizes a change to Akatosh's covenant with man. The barriers between the Mundus and Oblivion are now made permanent. No amulet or fires needed. Tamriel now, in theory, is forever to be protected by the dragon god thanks to Martin's sacrifice. This is where the events of Oblivion end, but as we later learn during Skyrim and through the Elder Scrolls novels, the story continues. With Martin now gone, the Septim bloodline was rendered extinct, and no candidate emerged to claim the royal throne. In the absence of an emperor, the Elder Council's High Chancellor, a competent, good-willed high elf named Okado, who was essentially running the government throughout the Oblivion Crisis anyway, and doing a lot for the player in Martin, became the new ruler, styling himself a potentate, governing the state while a new emperor was searched for. Okado was by all accounts a fair and good ruler, but he could only do so much. The Oblivion Crisis had greatly weakened the Empire, and now it was breaking apart. 5 years after Martin's sacrifice, Mount Vardenfell, Morrowind's Red Mountain, erupted, sending the province into chaos and functionally rendering it politically unmanageable from Cyrodiil. Within 2 decades, the An Axil, an Argonian nationalist party, took power in Blackmarsh and ended the province's policy of paying lip service to Cyrodiil. In the 20s, the Thalmor, a faction of Altmer supremacists in the Somerset Isles, took control of their region. Potentate Okado, being a high elf himself and understanding the danger of this faction, attempted to stop them, and was almost successful, but was assassinated. And soon after the Thalmor gained control of the Somerset Isles, they also took Valenwood, establishing a third Aldemary dominion. In the year 22, with Okado dead, Cyrodiil was seized by a Colovian warlord named Titus Mede, who declared himself emperor and established the Mede dynasty, which persists up till the events of Skyrim. By the year 100, the Dominion gained control of Elsewhere as well, through a mysterious event known as the Void Nights, where the moons, greatly important to Khajiit religion, disappeared and then came back. The Thalmor took credit for restoring them and effectively gained control of the province. Elsewhere by this point was functionally independent of imperial rule anyway. And by 171 of the Fourth Era, the Aldemary Dominion would deliver an ultimatum to Emperor Titus Mede II, Titus Mede I's great-great-grandson, demanding a cession of lands, a payment of tribute, the abolition of Talos, or Tiber Septim worship, and the arrest of the Blades. An ultimatum Titus refused, beginning the Great War, which itself lays the groundwork for the events of Skyrim 31 years later. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where we are going to leave the story. Thank you so much for stopping by, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. This video was an absolute blast to make, even if it had to be organized at the absolute last minute. I hope if you're new to Oblivion, if you're just looking for a refresher, or just generally interested in the Elder Scrolls universe, I was able to fill in some gaps in your knowledge, and hopefully articulate the narrative in a way you hadn't heard before. Despite this video's relatively long runtime, so much had to be left out of the story. You know, with Tiber's conquests, you have the Numidium and all these things going on. The Elder Scrolls 1, 2, and 3 only take place shortly before the events of Oblivion, and I just had to make the executive decision to, ignore them for the sake of this video. Frankly, they don't play that big of a role in Oblivion. Like, you don't Really, you don't need to know what happens in Morrowind or Daggerfall to understand Oblivion, though they are tangentially related, so that could have been nice, but listen, buddy, listen, I had to get this video out quick, okay? Anyway, we got some more content coming out. I had a Skyrim video, well over an hour in runtime, about 90% done, when this game just suddenly dropped and rug pulled that. So hopefully that video will be out within a week or so. A much faster turnover than we're used to, and boy, do we have a lot more Oblivion content planned for you all. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone. And a shout out again to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to check out War Thunder now for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile using my links in the description or pinned comment. Those of you who are new or haven't played in 6 months or more will also receive a massive bonus pack across PC and console, including multiple premium vehicles, in-game currency, the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, and more.
Dagon is defeated, cast back into Oblivion. We've won!